Okay, how's it going, everybody? So, today we're going to read some more Marx. This is The British Rule in India, which came out in the New York Tribune in 1853. It has an introduction here that I'll read and then we'll get into it. So it says, um, a second, please. So it says here from the editor, at the request of Charles A. Dana, its managing editor, Marx became the European correspondent of the New York Tribune in 1851. During the next 11 years, many of Marx's articles were published in that leading radical newspaper of its time. Quote, The British Rule in India, end quote, appeared in the Tribune on June 25th, 1853. It was written by Marx in English. So we'll go ahead and get into this. Telegraphic dispatches from Vienna announced that the Pacific solution of the Turkish, Sardinian, and Swiss questions is regarded there as a certainty. Last night, the debate on India was continued in the House of Commons, in the usual dull manner. Mr. Blackett charged the statements of Sir Charles Wood and Sir J. Hogg with bearing the stamp of optimistic falsehood. A lot of ministerial and directorial advocates rebuked the charge as well as they could, and the inevitable Mr. Hume summed up by calling on ministers to withdraw their bill. Debate adjourned. Hindustan is an Italy of Asiatic dimensions, the Himalayas for the Alps, the plains of Bengal for the plains of Lombardy, the Deccan for the Apennines, and the Isle of Ceylon for the island of Sicily. The same rich variety in the products of the soil, and the same dismemberment in the political configuration. Just as Italy has, from time to time, been compressed by the conqueror's sword into different national masses, so do we find Hindustan, when not under the pressure of the Mohammedan or the Mughal or the Briton, dissolved into as many independent and conflicting states as its numbers towns, or even villages. Yet in a social point of view, Hindustan is not the Italy, but the Ireland of the East. In this strange combination of Italy and Ireland, of a world of voluptuousness and a world of woes, is anticipated in the ancient traditions of the religion of Hindustan. That religion is at once a religion of sensualist exuberance and a religion of self-torturing asceticism, a religion of the lingam and the juggernaut, the religion of the monk and of the Bayadir. I share not the opinion of those who believe in a golden age of Hindustan, without recurring, however, like Sir Charles Wood, for the confirmation of my view, to the authority of Kuli Khan. But take, for example, the times of Aurangzeb, or the epoch when the Mughal appeared in the north and the Portuguese in the south, or the age of Mohammedan invasion in the Heptarchy in southern India. Or if you will, go still more back to antiquity, take the mythological chronology of the Brahmin himself, who places the commencement of Indian misery in an epoch even more remote than the Christian creation of the world. There cannot, however, remain any doubt but that the misery inflicted by the British on Hindustan is of an essentially different and infinitely more intensive kind than all Hindustan had to suffer before. I do not allude to European despotism, planted upon Asiatic despotism, by the British East India Company, forming a more monstrous combination than any of the divine monsters startling us in the Temple of Salset. There is no distinctive feature of British colonial rule, but only an imitation of the Dutch, and so much so that in order to characterize the working of the British East India Company, it is sufficient to literally repeat what Sir Stamford Rattles, the English governor of Java, said of the old Dutch East India Company. Quote, the Dutch Company, actuated solely by the spirit of gain, and viewing their subjects with less regard or consideration than a West India planter, formerly viewed a gang upon his estate, because the latter had paid the purchase money of human property, which the other had not employed all the existing machinery of despotism to squeeze from the people their utmost mite of contribution, the last dregs of their labor, and thus aggravated the evils of a capricious and semi-barbarous government by working it with all the practice ingenuity of politicians and all the monopolizing selfishness of traders, end quote. All the civil wars, invasions, revolutions, conquests, famines, strangely complex, rapid, and destructive as the successive action of Hindustan may appear, did not go deeper than its surface. England has broken down the entire framework of Indian society, without any symptoms of reconstitution yet appearing. This loss of his old world, with no gain of a new one, imparts a particular kind of melancholy to the present misery of the Hindu, and separates Hindustan, ruled by Britain, from all its ancient traditions and from the whole of its past history. There have been in Asia, generally from immemorial times, but three departments of government: that of finance, or the plunder of the interior; that of war, or the plunder of the exterior; and finally the Department of Public Works. Climate and territorial conditions, especially the vast tracts of desert, extending from the Sahara through Arabia, Persia, India, and Tartary, to the most elevated Asiatic highlands, constituted artificial irrigation by canals and waterworks, the basis of Oriental agriculture. As in Egypt and India, inundations are used for fertilizing the soil in Mesopotamia, Persia, etc. Advantage is taken of a high level for feeding irrigative canals. This prime necessity of an economical and common use of water, which in the Occident drove private enterprise to voluntary association, as in Flanders and Italy, necessitated in the Orient, where civilization was too low, and the territorial extent too vast to call into life voluntary association. The interference of the centralizing power of government. Hence, an economic function devolved upon all Asiatic government, the function of providing public works. This artificial fertilization of the soil depended on a central government, and immediately decaying with the neglect of irrigation and drainage, explains the otherwise strange fact that we now find whole territories barren and desert that were once brilliantly cultivated, as Palmyra, Petra, and ruins of Yemen, the large provinces of Egypt, Persia, and Hindustan. It also explains how a single war of devastation has been able to depopulate a country for centuries and to strip it all of its civilization. Now the British in East India accepted from their predecessors the Department of Finance and of War, but they have neglected entirely that of Public Works. Hence the deterioration of an agriculture which is not capable of being conducted on the British principle of free competition, of laissez-faire and laissez-aller. But in Asiatic empires, we are quite accustomed to see agriculture deteriorating under one government and reviving again under some other government. There, the harvests correspond to good or bad government, as they change in Europe with good or bad seasons. Thus, the oppression and neglect of agriculture, bad as it is, could not be looked upon as the final blow dealt to Indian society by the British intruder, had it not been attended by a circumstance of quite different importance, a novelty in the annals of the whole Asiatic world. However changing the political aspect of India's past must appear, its social condition has remained unaltered since its remotest antiquity, until the first decennium of the 19th century. The hand loom and the spinning wheel, producing their regular myriads of spinners and weavers, were the pivots of the structure of that society. From immemorial times, Europe received the admirable textures of Indian labor, sending in return for them her precious metals and furnishing thereby his material to the goldsmith. That indispensable member of Indian society, whose love of finery is so great that even the lowest class, those who go about nearly naked, have commonly a pair of golden earrings and a gold ornament of some kind hung around their necks. Rings on the fingers and toes have also been common. Women, as well as children, frequently wore massive bracelets and anklets of gold or silver, and statuettes of divinities in gold and silver were met with in the households. It was the British intruder who broke up the Indian handloom and destroyed the spinning wheel. England began with driving the Indian cotton from the European market, and then it introduced twist into Hindustan. In the end, inundated the very mother country of cotton with cottons. From 1818 to 1836, the export of twist from Great Britain rose in the proportion to 1 to 5,200. In 1824, the export of British muslins to India Muslims to India hardly amounted to 1,000,000 yards, while in 1837 it surpassed 64 million yards. But at the same time, the population of Dhaka decreased from 150,000 inhabitants to 20,000. This decline of Indian towns celebrated for their fabrics was by no means the worst consequence. British steam and science uprooted over the whole surface of Hindustan the union between the agricultural and manufacturing industries. These two circumstances, the Hindu on the one hand, leaving like all Oriental peoples to the central government the care of the great public works, the prime condition of his agriculture and commerce, dispersed, on the other hand, over the surface of the country, and agglomerated in small centers by the domestic union of agricultural and manufacturing pursuits. These two circumstances had brought about, since the remotest times, a social system of particular features, the so-called, quote, village system, end quote, which gave to each of these small unions their independent organization and distinct life. The peculiar character of this system may be judged from the following description contained in an old official report of the British House of Commons on Indian affairs. This is the report here. A village geographically considered as a tract of country comprising some 100 or 1,000 acres of arable and wastelands. Politically viewed, it resembles a corporation or township. Its proper establishment of officers and servants consists of the following descriptions. The potel or head inhabitant, who has generally the superintendence of the affairs of the village, settles the disputes of the inhabitants, attends to the police, and performs the duty of collecting the revenue within his village. A duty which his personal influence and minute acquaintance with the situation and concerns of the people render him the best qualified to discharge. The Kernum keeps the accounts of cultivation and registers everything connected with it. The Tailor and the Toti, the duty of the former of which consists in gaining information of crimes and offenses, and in escorting and protecting persons traveling from one village to another. The province of the latter appearing to be more immediately confined to the village, consisting among other duties, in guarding the crops and assisting in measuring them. The boundaryman, who preserves the limits of the village, or gives evidence respecting them in cases of dispute. The superintendent of tanks and watercourses distributes the water for the purposes of agriculture. The Brahmin, who performs the village worship. The schoolmaster, who is seen teaching the children in a village to read and write in the sand. The calendar Brahmin or astrologer, etc. These officers and servants generally constitute the establishment of a village, but in some parts of the country it is of less extent, some of the duties and functions above described being united in the same person. In others, it exceeds the above named number of individuals. Under the simple form of municipal government, the inhabitants of the country have lived from time immemorial. The boundaries of the villages have been but seldom altered, and though the villages themselves have been sometimes injured and even desolated by war, famine, or disease, the same name, the same limits, and the same interests, and even the same families have continued for ages. The inhabitants gave themselves no trouble about the breaking up and divisions of kingdoms, while the village remains entire. They care not to what power it is transferred, or to what sovereign it devolves. Its internal economy remains unchanged. The potel is still the head inhabitant, and still acts as the petty judge or magistrate and collector or renter of the village. So I think this is back to Marx now. These small stereotype forms of social organism have been to the greater part dissolved and are disappearing. Not so much through the brutal interference of the British tax gatherer and the British soldier as through the working of English steam and English free trade. Those family communities were based on domestic industry and that peculiar combination of hand weaving, hand spinning, and hand tilling agriculture, which gave them self-supporting power. English interference having placed the spinner in Lancashire and the weaver of Bengal, or sweeping away both Hindu spinner and weaver, dissolved these small semi-barbarian, semi-civilized communities by blowing up their... Hold on a second. Oh, see if I can get to the second page. By blowing up their economic bases, and thus produced the greatest and, to speak the truth, the only social revolution ever heard of in Asia. Now, sickening as it is, must be to human feeling to witness those myriads of industrious, patriarchal, and inoffensive social organizations disorganized and dissolved into their units, thrown into a sea of woes, and their individual members losing at the same time their ancient form of civilization and their hereditary means of subsistence. We must not forget that these idyllic village communities, inoffensive though they may appear, had always been the solid foundation of Oriental despotism, that they restrained the human mind within the smallest possible compass, making it the unresisting tool of superstition, enslaving it beneath the traditional rules, depriving it of all grandeur and historical energies. We must not forget the barbarian egotism which, concentrating on some miserable patch of land, had quietly witnessed the ruin of empires, the perpetuation of unspeakable cruelties, the massacre of the population of large towns, with no other consideration bestowed upon them than on natural events. Itself the helpless play of any aggressor who deigned to notice it all. We must not forget that this undignified stagnatory and vegetative life, that this passive sort of existence evoked on the other part in contradistinction wild, aimless, unbounded forces of destruction, and rendered murder itself a religious rite in Hindustan. We must not forget that these little communities were contaminated by distinctions of caste and by slavery, that they subjugated man to external circumstance instead of elevating man into the sovereign of circumstances, that they transformed a self-developing social state into never-changing natural destiny, and thus brought about a brutalizing worship of nature, exhibiting its degradation in the fact that man, the sovereign of nature, fell down on his knees in adoration of Hanuman, the monkey, and Sabala, the cow. England, it is true, in causing a social revolution in Hindustan, was actuated only by the vilest interests, and was stupid in her manner of enforcing them. But that is not the question. The question is, can mankind fulfill its destiny without a fundamental revolution in the social state of Asia? If not, whatever may have been the crimes of England, she was the unconscious tool of history in bringing about the revolution. Then whatever bitterness the spectacle of the crumbling of an ancient world may have for our personal feelings, we have the right in point of history to exclaim with Goethe, Solte dice qual uns qualen, da sien sere lus vermert, hat nicht myriaden Zielen, Timur's Erschaft aufgesert. So I guess what this means here is, since they thus have swelled our joy, should such torments grieve us then, doth not Timur's rule destroy myriad soul of living men? Okay. Yeah, so that is, let's see, an article written by Marx called The British Rule in India. It came out in 1853 in the New York Tribune. So thank y'all for tuning in. You know, Facebook, Tumblr, Medium. Facebook, Tumblr, Medium, all of these. Marxist Saw, you know, hit me up there. Tumblr, Medium, also YouTube. Subscribe to me, hit the notification bell. And yeah, well, thank y'all for tuning in. And y'all have a great day. And Dodada Goi.